everyone. This is Arabella from Arabella's Voice Studio. I'm so excited to be hosting one of our first podcasts for the series, Piano for the Vocalist. We are joined with Emet, and Emet teaches voice with us, and he's also really instrumental in some of our curriculum design as well as community outreach. But besides from working with the studio, he has done a lot of arrangements and compositional work through Berkeley and through other jobs that he's had. So I want to hand it over to Emet to just tell us a little bit about who he is and some of the work that he's done.
Thanks so much, Arabella. In addition to what you said, which is all true, I am currently living in Montreal right now. I'm teaching music as well here, and I'm also a songwriter, artist, performer, just all-around musician with I love arranging. I love theory too. I love teaching theory. So hopefully we can get to a little bit of that today.
So if it's okay with you, I'd love to just dive into some questions, really give something for the listeners to listen to. And of course, if things come up organically, they come up organically, and we'll just start off here. Tell us a little bit about your piano journey. What brought you to piano? Do you consider yourself a pianist, vocalist, all of the above?
I like that question and how it relates to identity, because I don't know if I consider myself a pianist, because everything I learned from piano was in service of my vocal talents and vocal journey. When I started piano, I started very young. I was about 5, and I did start out purely just playing from books and stuff, but I quickly found that I just wanted to play songs that I heard on the radio or on CDs. And my teacher, who I loved at the time, he just said, all right, here's a fake book. Let's figure out chords. And everything since then, I barely play classical music. I even struggle sometimes to do left hand stuff. So I really live in that area of how is the piano working for my voice?
Awesome. Yeah. And just for some background on myself too, I was your typical, I guess not so typical anymore, but piano dropout. I took it from 5 to 10. And I always tell this story lovingly because my piano teacher was great, but he also taught my grandma and my dad. So he had been teaching a while, had a very traditional way of teaching. And I would just show up to lessons I just want to sing and show you these songs that I wrote. Can you just teach me enough piano to do that? And of course, I was sent back to learn scales. And immediately, 5 years later, I was like, I'm done. I'm not playing piano. But I loved music, and I found choir, and I found musicals. So I always share with people that if I hadn't dropped out of piano, I probably would have dropped out of music altogether. But at the same time, I wish I had stuck with piano because it really serves me as a singer. And one thing I bring to the table, I think, maybe even in comparison to vocalists I've worked with, is I can play basic chords and scales. And so I'm not stuck waiting for someone to warm up, and I'm not stuck waiting for someone to just kind of accompany myself. It sort of brings me to my next question here is, how much piano do you think is necessary to learn to get to a level where you can do that stuff, feel like you can self-accompany?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that, as you ask that question, it's important to consider also, what's your goal here? What's the intended outcome? Because if you're trying to play at Carnegie Hall, then, you're going to need some serious piano chops. But if this is for an open mic, then, it can just be basic block chords. Learning chords and maybe some scales too. And the biggest part of that as well would be learning the difference between major and minor. I have the keyboard set up here, so I can use it. There's a beautiful gospel song called "Let Go and Let God" by a guy named P.J. Morton. Highly recommend you check him out. And it goes just a little like this. So, as soon as I stopped worrying how the story ends, when I let go and I let God have his way. There's a lot going on there, chord-wise and piano-wise. But we can break all those chords down into simple minor and major chords, right? We've got a major, as soon as major, minor. I stopped major, worrying, major, worrying, minor. And they're all triads here, just 3 notes. Minor, when I let minor go, and major, let major. I minor, God have his minor. So all of that is just 2 types of chords, just starting on different places. Long-winded way of answering your question, but where I would start would be learning chords, learning the difference between major and minor, and maybe thinking about learning about scales too.
Just to bring it full circle and make it really functional for the listener, what I'm hearing is find your place to start. And it can be a simpler place to start, like learning 3 notes together or learning 4 notes with that flat third or major third in there, and just finding your way into it to allow yourself to start.
Absolutely. I think it comes back as well to what you said about, your the piano dropout, because everything that your teacher wanted you to learn would help service you and service your voice, but you didn't want to learn it. You weren't interested in that. And I think that's a really important part of the learning process, is learning what you want to learn rather than what you feel like you need to learn. Right? Because if you want to learn something, you're going to want to learn it. You're going to make the progress and you're going to put the effort in. But if you feel like it's work, you're not going to absorb it. You're not going to internalize it. It's not going to help you.
So I'll throw out this conflict, so to speak, that I always share with teachers as I hire them or bring them on with our studio. And I have giving away some of our hiring secrets now. And I don't even think Emet sort of went through this part of it because we've evolved since we've started working together. But there's a task we use in our hiring process. And one of them is, can you play enough piano to teach? And the other one is, can you teach without a piano? And I think the reason we do that is, one, I want to make sure that everyone has the tools or modalities to support themselves. But also, I want to make sure that if we have someone who isn't super piano knowledgeable, that we can still be explaining these concepts. And also, a lot of people don't go home to a piano, so how can they practice without one? And so I'll turn the question to you, as if you were hiring or if you were thinking about for teachers or someone who are taking maybe voice really seriously, like, how necessary is it? Is it necessary?
I would say it's not necessary, but it's helpful. It's important to have, when you're learning something, as many ways of learning it as possible, because sometimes one way isn't going to always work. And I think what piano lends itself to is giving a visual as well as a physical kind of anchor point for learning. But if you don't have a piano, there's other ways that you can do that, right? You can use apps, you can use recordings, you can use even like whiteboards to visualize how you're going to practice. There's I can't remember the proper name for it, but there's a style of Indian singing that uses like these lines and little symbols to show what kind of vocal technique is wanted from you. And so that's another physical way of learning and seeing what your voice can do, if that makes sense.
It does, totally. And I didn't know that about that style of singing, so super interesting. I think that's a lot of great points already. Here's one that occurred to me as we talked through this. A lot of times singers will come in and they're sort of faced with this idea of, I really want to talk through things because it's helpful for my learning, but I'm wasting time because I'm not actually on the instrument itself, whether it be piano or voice. So sort of the 2-point question I have for you is, how much talking versus playing should you be doing in lessons? And should you be devoting time to learning piano in that lesson setting if your intention is to be a singer?
As someone with an ADHD diagnosis, I have to follow my heart and my brain when it comes to practicing. Otherwise, it won't happen. So when I sit down to practice, I have to find what is going to work for me in that practice day. I do have, somewhat of a practice schedule, especially if I'm, practicing for a gig or something like that. But if it's just me time, I try and dedicate the time to what I'm interested in learning. And finding the balance there between just what I'm feeling like doing and applying some academic or work ethic to it is understanding what I want to accomplish in that moment in that practice session. So say I want this song to feel more natural. I'll there's multiple components to that. There's natural feelings in my voice or less pressure in my voice, and maybe the combination of me playing the piano and singing at the same time is causing stress or it's making it harder. So practicing that aspect of it, I'd think that when it comes to divvying up your time on piano versus voice, it should always be about what your goals are.
Great. So again, to take it full circle, because I'm big on takeaways here. I'm hearing two so far from our conversation. One of them is to start small, but just start. You don't need to take on everything to start learning piano, but singing or anything else, just find your entry point. And the second one I'm hearing is know what your goals are, even if those are changing day to day. Have an intention when you sit down to practice or go in a lesson. Know what it is that you want to accomplish.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even having that in like some sort of journal, like I recommend everyone having a practice journal of some sort, even if it's just recording what you've been doing. But it's also very helpful to plan, like proactively plan what you want to do too. Obviously, there's going to be some impromptu stuff, and you might not be able to follow it directly. But it's good to have that written direction that you can always come back to if you're like, well, I don't know what I want to do today, or I'm not sure how to proceed on this. It's always good to just have a little bit of writing outside of your head to help guide you.
Absolutely. And in teacher trainings with us, and what we try to bring to the table for our students is having this idea of micro goals to work towards a macro goal. And usually those macro goals are a little bit easier to identify. Like, I want to learn piano. I want to sing at the next open mic. And those micro goals tend to be a little bit harder because we're not sure what the stepping stone is to get to the macro goal. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, I would. Yeah.
I'm hearing that one strategy is having a vocal journal or a piano journal, practice journal, to keep track of what you're doing. Along those lines, I'm going to kind of tangent a little bit, but I think it relates. Multi-instrumentalist, or someone who's interested in composition, arranging, where I think a lot of your strengths are. What got you there? How did you come up with that as like a macro goal to work towards?
It's going to be it's an odd answer, but it's dissatisfaction. It was when I would play, when I hear a song that I wanted to play, right? Because I loved it. I would play it on the piano and be like, oh, something's missing here. And I would just be singing, something's missing here. It's like, oh, it's because this song is really relying on the bass line or the drum part. And so when I hear that and I hear the lack of it in just me playing on the piano, I'm like, okay, well now I want to learn not maybe how to play it, but how it works, how each instrument lends itself to the song. It really is just this doesn't feel right. I want to learn why it doesn't feel right and how I can make it feel right.
Yeah, I really like that. And I had a similar experience where I just really like to be nerdy about how things work. And I think that's sort of where my love of arranging and compositional work comes from. Because once you figure out how things work, you can be like, oh, this is how I would put it back together.
Yeah.
So that's where my love for that came from.
That definitely, I resonate with that on a theory basis too, because for the longest time I was like, okay, why does this sound good? What is this chord that literally makes my face go like, ooh, right? It's almost a knee-jerk reaction, and learning about why that's all there is just fascinating. I will say though, it does make it a little more difficult to apply because you're like, okay, here's this thing, and your ear gets used to it and understanding it, and so you're now like, okay, then it feels like there's this pressure to always do the most complex thing when you really don't. Going back to basics, understanding why those basics sound great, even though they're like not crazy theory things, it's an important thing to return to. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I was talking about this with my own piano teacher. And for those listening, I teach voice, I teach piano to some extent, and I'm still in lessons. And I think that's a really important thing to keep, even if it's not lessons, but to keep on learning to go deeper and deeper into what you love. So I'll just put that out there. But we talk about a lot how you reach this point, like you're quote intermediate or advanced. And you sort of go back to what you didn't wanna work on in the fundamental beginning parts, like, you're in such a rush to learn everything, and you do, and you get there, and then you're like, "Wait, but this would be so much easier if I went back to basics and, like, worked on my rhythm, worked on, sight reading, sight singing." And so a lot of my recent journey has been like, "Okay, like, I have this knowledge of the harmony, counterpoint, whatever, whatever, and now I'm gonna go back and work with a metronome."
Yeah, I'm at that space too. I never wanted to work on rhythm, and then I started, loving music that was really rhythm heavy, lots of R&B, gospel stuff, and every time I try playing with a metronome, I feel like I'm five again at my my first lesson, and my teacher just being like, "Okay, no, we're gonna try again. We're gonna try again. It's okay." And I have to kind of like almost comfort myself, or not comfort myself, but just remind myself that like even though I've done all this music education and learning, that like it doesn't matter if I'm struggling with something because I'm still doing it, and doing it is the thing that gets you there, right?
Absolutely. So here's the question part of it for you. It's humbling, but how do you keep it fun? How do you keep it fun for yourself where you're like, I know all this stuff, but now here I am?
For me, it's application, because when I'm think, okay, I want to learn something, it's because I hear something, I'm like, I want to learn that. I want to know how that works. So starting at the smallest point, like for example, I've been like just kind of learning bass for the past 6 months, just grabbing a bass at work whenever I can. And rather than, just doing scales all the time, which I sometimes do, I just put on a song that I like and try and figure out the bass line. And that motivates me because I want to play with this song. There's a great song by Anderson .Paak called "Come Down" that has just this killer bass line, and that's what motivated me to start getting back into bass. So I guess to answer your question is apply what you're learning. Find a way to practice it like you were like performing, right? Just find a way that makes you feel like you're learning, like you're engaging, and like you're meeting a goal, right? If you sit down because you want to learn a piece and play it, then find the easiest way to play it.
I think of being a multi-instrumentalist kind of like learning a bunch of languages or different dialects, I would say, within the same language. Do you think there's ever a point where learning it gets confusing? So, for instance, people talk about how if you learn Italian and Spanish together, they'll fortify each other, but there is a period of learning where it kind of like mixes in your brain. Do you feel that way about different instruments, or what's your take on that?
Absolutely. I would definitely say that there is that period where because there's different rules for different instruments, right? And especially when you're at the beginner phase in any instrument, those those rules are ones that you want to follow. As you get more advanced and learn more about the instruments, you've learned the rules, now you can break them. I often joke with my brother that like anytime you're learning a subject, your teacher or whoever is teaching you, or if yourself, you have to kind of lie about all the nuances. There's these rules and they're never broken. And then the next level that you learn, like, okay, actually, those rules don't actually apply. They're just kind of there, but there's ways that we can get around them.
Yeah.
And so when you're first learning those parts of the instrument where there are those strict rules, they don't mesh well. As you start getting more and more advanced, they start meshing together because, like you said, they are the same language, just a different dialect. But when you're first learning that dialect, there's going to be loan words that won't mix well, or there's going to be certain concepts that are only available in certain dialects, if that makes sense.
Holy. So here's a follow-up for you. How important is it to learn those rules? Like say you're interested in singing, but you want to play enough piano to self-accompany or really on any instrument. Do you then have to learn all the theory rules and all the technical rules that go with that? Or can you say, hey, I'm going to sit down at the piano and play, and whatever comes out comes out.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of those two. Circling back to what we were talking about before, you're going to learn what you're interested in. And so if you're interested in a part of that that breaks the rules, sure, try it out. But just be aware that those rules are there for a reason. And I would say try and learn those rules, but like I said, just learn what you want to learn, do what motivates you.
Totally, totally. And I think it goes to the kind of person you are and knowing who you are. From a teaching perspective, I think we have to be like chameleons kind of and like adjust to whoever's in the room, change our tactics. But it also really helps if you as the student comes in knows, hey, like I'm someone who thinks through everything, or I'm someone who just needs to sit down and play. If you know that about yourself, great, start there. And then the challenge becomes, can you do the opposite? That's my perspective on it.
I agree with that. And it's why I sometimes find that adult lessons can go a little, like, I won't say smoother, but just we can get down to brass tacks very quickly, because adults, there's not this like they don't see you as an authority figure as kids do, right? So they're happy to share, okay, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I want, this is like how I learn, versus sometimes kids will just kind of be there and default to you. And so you have to almost trick them into revealing like how they learn, what they're into, what they're what kind of things that they would want to learn, what would motivate them.
So I'm gonna wrap us up here with 3 questions to bring it back full circle, bring it back to the piano, talk about kind of what we came here to do today. One of them is talk about what you just said, lessons. I guess it's a multi-question in this one, so work with me, ask me questions back. But where should you go to learn? And specifically for lessons, should you be going to a multi-instrumentalist studio? Should you be going to someone who specializes in piano or voice? Like, hopefully they're not mixing the two. Or do you not go to a studio at all? Do you learn with apps or YouTube videos? What's your take on that?
I think I'm gonna sound boring here, but it's the same thing. It's do what you're interested in. If you want to be, if you're talking about a multi-instrumentalist studio, if you want to be playing with other people, yeah, go there. Go to a place where multiple instruments are being taught and people are learning different instruments. If you strictly only want to learn about piano and voice, find someone who does both, right? If you want to learn just piano, find someone who does do maybe not just piano, but understands the piano as its own instrument. And if you're not sure, then I would definitely recommend like self-learning for a bit. See what you want, because lessons can be expensive, and if you don't know what you want from them, you may end up feeling a little dissatisfied with them. So I would definitely start with self-learning and understanding what you want first before you start putting more time into it than you can commit to, right?
Absolutely. And from my perspective or bias, just to share, I have done all of the above.
Yeah.
Especially for myself, who I run the studio, trying to learn what other curriculums were or develop my own, just as much knowledge as I could possibly gain. I've done sort of different things, but also I love to learn. So that's part of it for me. But I've done the apps. I have taken from a traditional piano/voice teacher. I will say I've taken some of the best voice lessons I've ever had from a guitar teacher. And that was just because their knowledge of harmony was so strong that when I went to sort of the choral world or even just duets, like my harmony understanding was so much stronger. And same with piano, just that what my piano teacher brought to me with theory and rhythm and just having 2 separate hands to do things. Like obviously in your voice, there's one voice, and in piano, there's 2 hands, but it sort of begged the question of like, okay, how could I copy that in my voice? How could I do 2 things at once with my one instrument? So I have just learned so much from other instrumentalists who didn't specialize in voice. Now, I would say I think I was able to sort of glean some of that information away because I had gone so deep in the voice that I could ask some of their more nuanced questions. But still, you're never going to not gain from someone if you go in with an open mind.
Another thing that I would just say maybe is do your best to internalize the ideas that you are being taught, right? Because I've been in both situations where I've just, just taken in information and retained it and then regurgitated it. But if you internalize it and try and make it your own, then everything else is going to make sense if you start learning from other musicians or other people who play different instruments than you. If you have that like internal knowledge of it, I think that that can be super advantageous. So when you're learning, don't be afraid to like ask questions that are going to make these concepts more you friendly, if that makes sense. Like as you're learning, don't be afraid to, do your best to personalize the information.
Especially if you're paying for lessons at the end of the day, and every teacher has their own approach. So I don't want to knock anyone else's teaching style, but you are paying for a service. And so it's got to serve you. Now, some teachers will come in with the idea of this is what I offer. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Knowing what you offer is a good thing, but they're a little bit more traditional in that you follow a curriculum, you follow a method book. That's all fine. But you have to think about, is that what you want? Is it working for you? And I'll give a quick side note example here. We had a student who wanted to work with us the other day, and I am open to working with all students. That is my philosophy. But it became really apparent really quickly that we weren't the best studio to serve them because their goal was to have a more traditional lesson, to work out of a method book, they specifically wanted to work on classical music. They brought in like a 24 song aria book collection. And it's not that we don't teach classical music, but our studio philosophy is different than that. We try to gamify things, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into too much of our studio philosophy there, but it became really apparent that we wouldn't serve them best. So what I said was, you're welcome to work with us, but I want to make sure that you're going to have the best experience. And I think knowing that as a consumer is really important. Go in with the intention of, I want to get the best experience for myself.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm on my second of my final 3 questions here. How has learning piano, and you've already answered this, but looking at your stages that you've been in so far and where you are in your professional musical work life right now, how has piano served you and where do you think it'll continue to serve you?
First and foremost, it supports my voice, right? When I'm singing, it gives that added layer of harmony that recontextualizes my voice. So I owe that to the piano for sure. It's the most theory-friendly instrument, in my opinion, because you've got each note laid out next to each other. So counting, say if we're learning about intervals, counting a fifth. Oh, let me turn that up. Right, counting fifth here. You're just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that makes theory a lot more digestible for me, as opposed to on guitar where there are multiple ways to play a fifth. Because you've got 6 different strings, you can play the same note on each string. And that got a little confusing for me as I was learning guitar. And the idea that, like, with continuing with theory, any chord, right, you can just skip each note. And you've got a very complex chord here just by skipping one note each. It's a very visually friendly instrument for theory, which I love.
Yeah, especially in comparison to the voice, where we're always like holding up diagrams or holding up models like, this is what's inside you. I'm trying to visualize it. But yeah, the piano is laid out right in front of you.
And on that as well, like it's the voice, it's very physical. We don't have a visual key for it. It's why we like look into mirrors as much as possible when we're singing, right? But the piano, it has all 3 of the classic learning styles, if you want to think of it that way. You've got the kinesthetic, where your fingers are doing the touching. You've got the audio of the notes being played, and you have the visual. It's got all 3 of them there. So any style of learning can be applied to this.
And I would just say too, because I am a voice defender, even though we're talking about the piano today, think about that too as you study voice or any instrument. How can you apply those, as Emet called them, the classic learning styles that you learn on piano that's so easily accessible there to other things? And I think that's a great takeaway for even learning piano, is like how to learn. And then finally, just to recap for our listeners, we talked about how piano has served you. We've talked about, ways you can do it. And going back to that, and my final question here is, if you were to leave the listeners, because I'm big on the practical, one practical tip can be on the piano, like practical learning instrumentally, or it can just be more theoretical, philosophical. What would you leave them with?
Oh, okay. Let's see.
Not to put you on the spot after, 40 minutes, whatever it was. What is the one thing you would leave our listeners with?
Practice as often as you can, even if it's for like 5 minutes. I use this example with my students. When you were a baby, picking up a cup was super hard, right? You needed both hands to do it. You need all your arm strength, and you were probably pretty tired after like taking a few sips from water when you were a baby. But now you've been picking up a cup every day for years, and you've been drinking out of it. You can do it with one hand. You can probably do it with 2 fingers, right? And it's because you've done it every day, even though you haven't spent time, practicing picking up a cup of water. You've just done it. And it's the same thing with learning any instrument, voice or piano. The more you do it, even if it's just for a little bit of time, the more frequent it's going to be in your brain, the more present it is in your brain. So just practice as much as possible.
Yeah, I really like that. And besides from the studio information, where I encourage anyone who's interested to reach out to us to work with Emet, and all our information we'll put at the end here. But do you have music out? Do you have any information that you would want to share on a personal level with our listeners where they could learn with you or get in touch?
I don't have any music out as of now, but hopefully that's going to change in the next 6 months. Fingers crossed. And if you're interested in learning more or even just talking more, my contact is through Arabella's voice studio. So feel free to reach out that way if you like.
Yeah, great. And thank you so much for your time, for your expertise in this. I'll just wrap us up by saying we're really excited to be starting these podcast series and putting other information out there. Piano for the Vocalist arose because we are primarily a vocal studio, but we had enough students who came in, were like, I really wish I could just play enough piano where I can warm up myself, play chords for myself. So when I go do these open mics, I don't feel like I need to be waiting for you or waiting for a different teacher to express myself independently. And so Piano for the Vocalist is largely a free resource that we put out. It's pianoforthevocalist.com. There are some paid things on there, like if you want Emet to help you with a personal arrangement for you to help organize your songwriting, or if you have a piece you're working on, but you just want it to be more player friendly, we do offer those as paid services. But generally, we have tried to make as much on that site free and just shared information out there. This was born out of the passion for music that I have. And I like to say that this is not your typical piano course, in that piano teachers went out to teach other piano players how to play. It was a piano course made by voice teachers to teach singers how to accompany themselves. So we're a little different in that way, but I hope this resource is something that is useful for you and continues to be useful for you as we go. So again, I'm Arabella. I am with Arabella's Voice Studio. I'm really excited to be launching this series and sharing some of my love that I have, not only for voice, but with piano as well. Emet was gracious enough to come talk to us. Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to more.
Thank you for having me.